Once again, we'd like to turn to the 46th Psalm. And once again, we'll read the entire psalm. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore will not we fear, though the earth be removed, and though the mountains be carried into the midst of the sea. Though the waters thereof roar and be troubled, though the mountains shake with the swelling thereof. Selah. There is a river, the streams whereof shall make glad the city of God, the holy place of the tabernacles of the Most High. God is in the midst of her, she shall not be moved. God shall help her, and that right early. The heathen raged, the kingdoms were moved. He, God, uttered his voice, the earth melted. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. Selah. Come, behold the works of the Lord, what desolations he hath made in the earth. He maketh wars to cease unto the end of the earth. He breaketh the bow and cutteth the spear in sunder. He burneth the chariot in the fire. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the heathen. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. Selah. The Psalms, of course, are songs. They are poetry. And therefore, the primary intent of the Psalms is not to inform us. It doesn't mean that there's not information in the Psalms. The Psalms are filled with information. But the intent of the Psalms, the primary intent, being songs and poetry, is not merely to inform us, but to move us. And they are meant to alter, to guide, to heighten our emotions. One of the most amazing features of the Psalms is their relevancy to our lives. They are designed so that you and I can easily make application to ourselves, to our circumstances. And no matter where you may be, no matter what you may be experiencing, you can always find yourself, you can always find your circumstances in the Psalms. That's the design of the Psalms. Being songs and poetry, there is usually a very orderly flow to all the Psalms. And such is certainly the case here in this 46th Psalm. In verses 1 through 9, the psalmist is speaking of God. He's speaking of God. He's not talking to God, he is speaking of God. But in verse 10, that flow is interrupted. And God is not being spoken of, but in verse 10, God is speaking. He says, "Be still and know that I am God." That's not the psalmist speaking. That's God speaking. I will be exalted among the heathen. I will be exalted in the earth. And then in verse 11, the psalmist resumes speaking of the Lord. And he repeats what he said in verse 7. But I do believe that though he spoke verse 7 with great certainty, with great confidence, with great joy and calm, Even more so in verse 11. Because God spoke in verse 10. Having heard from God in verse 10, I believe that there is greater assurance, greater comfort, greater strength, greater security, greater peace, greater refreshment, greater victory, greater encouragement, greater conviction, greater courage, greater energy in verse 11 than in verse 7. So in verse 10, God speaks. God speaks. We can view it as a God interruption. Again, the psalmist is speaking of God for 9 verses. Then all of a sudden, God interrupts to give a reminder of Himself and to exhort the psalmist and us in light of who He is. So what we read here in verse 10 is the instruction, the exhortation, the application of the entire psalm. It's the climax of the psalm. A God interruption. Know how we need God interrupting our lives. That's our subject, God's blessed interruption. Reading through the psalm, I believe that we can rightly conclude that the psalmist is in a good spiritual condition. He's in a good spiritual place. But even so, God interrupts in verse 10. And as a result, I believe he gets to a better spiritual place in verse 11. Thank God for His reminding interruptions. Because there is the danger with human nature that even when we have assurance concerning God, the danger is that we get so busy, so caught up, so distracted, so entangled with the affairs of life that we do become oblivious to God. But God in His mercy, God in His goodness, interrupts and directs our attention to Himself. You and I that are saved, we have experienced this. Know how we ought to long for such times. The sad truth is, and I'm not saying this is the case with the psalmist, we can speak of God. We can speak wonderful things of God, and yet God not have our personal attention. I'm not saying that was the case here. The sad truth is, we can sit in church. We can sing of God, and He not have our attention. So every now and then, God interrupts, just to remind us who He is. So notice verse 10 again. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the heathen. I will be exalted in the earth. I want to consider 3 main points. First of all, God makes a very explicit declaration. There is secondly a call or command that goes forth. And then thirdly, there is a promise. But first consider that God makes a very explicit declaration. The key phrase to what God says here is, I am God. Every now and then, God's people need to hear that from God, reminding them they're not. He is. I am God. How often when God's people are so bent on fixing somebody or something, they need to hear God say, I'm God. You're not. I'm God. It is an announcement. It is a proclamation from God Himself. I am God. It is explicit. I am God. It is exhaustive. It covers everything. I am God. You and I believe, there isn't anyone here today that doesn't believe that He is God. We all believe that He is God. But oh, how wonderful and how powerful when we hear Him say, I am God. I am God. Such ought to stir us. Such ought to inspire us. Such will humble us. Hear Him say, I am. He's calling attention to Himself. He is making a personal statement about Himself. I am. He is telling something of His identity, something of His character, something of His function, something of His work as it relates to man. Hear Him say, I am. And whatever follows, since God is speaking, whatever follows is absolute, it is definite, it is certain, it is emphatic. I am. And no, whatever follows is exclusive. Whatever follows is unconditional. I am. It is a statement that covers all time. Past, present, and future. He is saying, I am at present what I've always been, and I will be what I've always been and what I am. I am. I am God. There are no words more significant, more relevant, more consequential than God saying, I am God. He is saying there is nothing beyond my dominion. There is nothing beyond my control. This is not the psalmist saying that he is God. This is God saying, I am God. There is a stark difference between you and I speaking of Him as God and God announcing and proclaiming, I am God. There's no time, there's no place, there's no realm, there's no circumstance, there's no situation in which it is not so. I am God. It is a statement without any bounds, without any limits. It is a perpetual, infinite, and everlasting truth. I am God. Whether it be God whispering in our ear, I am God. How wonderful when He does that. I am God. Or whether it be God with reverberating voice, I am God. It's just wonderful to hear. It is a wonderful interruption. It is a wonderful reminder. I am God. We need to hear Him say that. I am God. We need to declare it, that He is God. But more importantly than us declaring it is Him saying, I am God. I am God. That statement is inclusive of everything that the psalmist has said of Him in those first 9 verses. I am God. I am the Most High. I am the Lord of hosts. I am the God of Jacob. And as such, I am your refuge, and I am your strength, and I am a very present help in trouble. So hear Him say, I am God. And know that that includes everything that is said of Him in this book. I am God. As God, He is self-existent. That is, His existence is contingent upon nothing. As God, He is eternal. It is declared in Psalm 90 and verse 2 that before the mountains were brought forth, wherever Thou hast formed the earth and the world, even from everlasting to everlasting, Thou art God. As God, He is immutable. He said in Malachi 3 and verse 6, I am the Lord. I change not. As God, He reigns supreme. He's not some distant spectator. He reigns, and He reigns as God. He presides and He prevails over all things. There's nothing outside of His jurisdiction. And there is nothing that can shake His reign. In this day where unrest, discontent, and lawlessness are everywhere, and in this day when evil men and seducers wax worse and worse, and when all seems to be chaos and men are perplexed, God reigns, and He does everything according to His will. There is no law outside of His law. As God, He is almighty. You take all the uprisings, all the strivings, all the contending, all the opposition and all the defiance of man and the world against God. And no matter what form these may take, and no matter where they may come from, and no matter how widespread they might be, and no matter how powerful and intense it might be, and no matter how often repeated, He is God. And He is mightier than whatever else is going on. As God, He is almighty. That means God is able. We hear God say, I am God. He is proclaiming, I am able. I can. As God, He is all-knowing. His knowledge is infinite. His knowledge is perfect. His knowledge is perpetual. He does not need us to give Him information. There is no problem that He does not have the answer for, that He is not the answer for. And there is nothing that He does not know. He has a perfect and eternal knowledge of all things. His understanding, Psalm 147:5, is infinite. As God, He is omnipresent. We hear God say in Jeremiah 23:24, can any hide himself in secret places that I shall not see him? Do not I fill heaven and earth? Go wherever you want. God is there. God is there. And though there are many and varied cares and trials and tribulations and obstacles, nothing is more present than God. As God, He is faithful. Deuteronomy 7 verse 9, the faithful God. He never fails. He never falters. And what man does or does not do has no effect upon the faithfulness of God. We read in 2 Timothy 2:13, if we believe not, yet He abideth faithful. What you believe or don't believe has no effect upon who He is, upon who God is. So these people today that want to give you the latest poll on what people think about God, that doesn't have a thing to do with God. Doesn't affect His person, doesn't affect who He is. Well, you realize that 60-some% of people don't even believe in God. Doesn't affect who He is. As God, He is sufficient. He's enough. He's more than enough. In the midst of storm, in the midst of danger, in the midst of need, in the midst of weakness, in the midst of burdens, in the midst of difficulties and problems and sorrows and battles and obstacles, hear God say, I am God. I am God. And know that He's more than enough. Whatever your circumstances, whatever your situation might be. And though everything may seem like it's falling apart and spinning out of control, hear God say, I am God. I am God. And while the heathen rage, they're spewing forth their agitation, they're spewing forth their fury and their wrath and their outrage and resentment toward God, hear God say, I am God. I am God. And know He's more than enough. He's more than enough. In the midst of all the theories, in the midst of all the philosophies that relegate God to the background and that put Him in a position of the lowest sort, and in a time when modern Christendom's conception of God is simply a miserable caricature, a blasphemous perversity of the true God. God is presented as a helpless being, a creation of sentiment, an object of pity. Hear God say, I am God. And know that He is sovereign, almighty, all-knowing, omnipresent, faithful, all-sufficient God. Oh, how we need to hear Him say, I am God. I am the one who can still part the waters. I am the one who can still sweeten the bitter waters. I am the one who still knows the way through the wilderness. I am the one who can use the few and the feeble. I am God. I can still open rivers in high places and can still put fountains in the midst of valleys and can still make the wilderness a pool of water and still make the crooked straight. I am God. I am the one who will hold your hand. I am the one who will carry you and walk with you through the valley of the shadow of death. I am God. I am the one who will comfort you and spread a table before you. Oh, hear him say, I am God. There are rich blessings. There are unsearchable riches in those words. I am God. Oh, that God would speak. That God would interrupt our lives with these words, I am God. And that those words would grip our hearts. Change our lives. I am God. Now, secondly, in relation to that declaration, there is a call. There is a command that goes forth. Again, the key phrase, I am God. Everything else centers upon those words. I am God. In relation to such, a command goes forth. Be still. In other words, calm down. Calm down. How often we need to hear God say, I'm God. Be still. Just settle down. Just settle down. Be still. And that is in the light of the fact that I am God. That I am God. Notice be. It's not do. It's be. It's a command to a state of being. The state of being is still. That's a hard thing to do. Be still. When the world seems to be spinning out of control, when your world seems to be spinning out of control, it's hard to be still. I got to do something. I've heard people say, even it's the wrong thing, do something. Really? I am God. Be still. What's he saying? Be still. Cease. Discontinue your own ways. The reason? I'm God. What other reason do you need? I'm God. Be still. Well, I'll calm down when all this is past. I'm God. Be still. Be still. The command is to be in a state of surrender. The reason? I am God. I am God. All around us is movement. The vast majority of people are hurrying about to satisfy themselves. But in the midst of all the clamor, in the midst of all the anxiety, oh, how we need to hear and obey God. Be still. Be still. Remember what he said to the Israelites? They get to the Red Sea, there's nowhere to go. And what did he say? Be still. And see the salvation of the Lord. we'd see a lot of things if we just settle down. We'd see a lot of things about God if we just cease from our own ways. You say, well, I can't. It's my nature. Well, you're right there. It's your nature. That doesn't make it right. You need to know that He's God. Be still. Be still. There's help there. Be still. There's healing there. Be still. You'll find relief there. Be still. There's joy there. There's fulfillment there. There's encouragement there. There's peace there. There's victory. Be still. It is a command to take our proper place before God. Why? Because I'm God. Be still. This is how you enjoy God. This is how you enjoy life. Take your proper place before God. You will not find any enjoyment being out of place in regards to God. There is a call here to awareness. Notice what it says. Be still and know that. Introducing something very specific. And know that I am God. Be still and know. Now, to know has several implications. To know, of course, is to recognize and to be aware. So God is saying, recognize and be aware that I am God. Now, in order to do that, sometimes we have to just settle down and be still and recognize and be aware that I am God. To know can refer to confidence, persuasion, certainty. So it is God saying, be confident, regardless of what is happening. Be persuaded. Be certain. Be absolutely assured that I am God. That'll change our lives. Be still and know that I am God. Know that I am God. It's important that we realize that this requires be still. Be still and know. Be still and know. That is a call to faith. You know what happens many times? Well, use the children of Israel as an example at the Red Sea. God said, be still. Did their situation improve? No. It got worse. Those Egyptians didn't stop. They kept getting closer and closer and closer. And a lot of times when God says be still, your circumstances will get worse. And I believe the Egyptians got close enough where they could see their faces and recognize some of their former masters. And then he said, move. You don't move till God tells you to. Well, things are getting worse. I got to do something. Be still. Well, I can't. It's getting worse. Know that I'm God. And you can. Be still and know that I'm God. It's a call to faith. It's a call to believe that I am God. It is a call to a central focus. I am God. Reading this 46th Psalm, the psalmist believed and knew that God was God. And we believe. And we know that He's God. But when God says to us, be still and know that I'm God, that's a call to a greater awareness of who He is. And we need that. Even in our best spiritual state, we need a greater awareness that He is God. I am God. It's a call to a greater reliance and dependence upon Him. Be still and know that I am God. It is a call to seek Him more. It's a call to look to Him more. It's a call to come to Him more. It's a call to cleave to Him more and to rest in Him more. Be still and know that I am God. I've been told many times as a pastor, you've got to do something. We've got to have a business meeting. We've got to have it right now. We've got to do something right now. We will when we hear from God. It's not an emergency with Him. It may be with you, but it's not with God. When God says move, we'll move. Until then, we'll just believe that He's God, and we'll leave it with Him. That's a good way to live life. Don't get ahead of God. Don't get behind Him either. It's a knowledge, be still and know that I am God. It is a knowledge that will not leave us detached from God. Will not leave us indifferent toward Him. Be still and know that I am God. I am God. I am God. That needs to pierce through everything that's going on. Whatever's going on in our life, those words, I am God, need to pierce through everything and reach our hearts. And reach our hearts. How many times you hear someone say, I know He's God, but here it comes. They're going to explain away God. They're going to justify their worry. They're going to justify their anxiety. He's God. No buts. He's God. Know that I am God. This is confidence. This is persuasion. This is assurance. This is conviction. This is certainty. He is God. It is a knowledge that has personal impact. Be still and know that I am God. There's courage there. When you hear God say, I'm God, there's courage there. There's strength. Again, He is our strength, verse 1. And many times all He has to do to strengthen us is to say, I'm God. I'm God. You be still. I'm God. I don't need your help. I'm God. Gives us greater resolve to know that He is God. Gives us greater steadfastness, greater comfort and gladness. We believe that He is God. But oh, how we need to live in the reality of what we say we believe. I am God. Oh, that would grip our hearts. We need to know that He's God. We need a greater awareness that He's God. Thirdly, there's a promise. I will be exalted among the heathen. I will be exalted in the earth. The promise is, it's twice said, but the promise is, I will be exalted. I am God, and I will be exalted. as God. I will be exalted as God among the heathen. You say, well, it's not happening yet. Oh, it will. It will. Why? Because He's God. I am God, and I will be exalted. You just be still, and you just know that I'm God. What He's saying here when He says, I will be exalted, He's saying everything's on course. Oh, that God's people would get a hold of that. Everything's on course. Everything's moving in the direction of the exaltation of God. Yes, everything is moving toward the government of the Antichrist, but I'm not going to be here then. Everything's moving toward the exaltation of God. So we can look at the happenings of today and get all upset, or we can rejoice, praise God, everything's on course. Everything's moving in the right direction. We're getting closer to the exaltation of God. And though we are surrounded by difficulties and trials and battles and struggles, and giants and obstacles and barriers, chaos and ruins of what once was, and though our nation and our society and our culture descends further and further into the abyss, and that's what's happening, hear these words. I am God. I will be exalted among the heathen. I will be exalted in the earth. Someone says, well, that's your opinion. No, this is God speaking. It has nothing to do with my opinion. God says, I am God, and I will be exalted among the heathen. In spite of the fact that there is world, national, political, and moral crisis, we need to hear these words. I will be exalted among the heathen. I will be exalted in the earth. And everything's moving in that direction. Everything's moving according to the plan. According to God's plan. I will be exalted. Oh, that those words would grip our hearts. That we would live in the reality of Psalm 46, verse 10. And if we live in the reality of Psalm 46:10, we come down to verse 11, and our passion and our exuberance and our confidence is even more so. We ought to be getting more confident every day. We ought to be getting more exuberant every day. We ought to be getting more passionate every day. Because we're getting closer. I will be exalted. Oh, for God to interrupt our lives. Be still. A lot of people, and all of us from time to time, many times, we need to hear God say, be still. Just be still. And you might say, why? I'm God. That's the only reason you need. Be still and know that I'm God. In a world that is saturated and permeated with vileness, and wickedness, and ungodliness, and blasphemy, and heresy, and foolishness. Hear God say, I'm God, and I will be exalted. And as you hear Him say that, know also that He is our refuge, our strength, a very present help Live in verse 10. Believe Him. When He says, I'm God, believe Him. Trust Him. Depend upon Him. Lean upon Him. Walk with Him. Go to Him. Talk to Him. Cast everything upon Him. He's God. He's God. Determined today that by the help, because He is our refuge and our strength and our very present help in trouble, I'm not going to be swallowed and consumed by the humanistic, evolutional thinking, ways, pursuits, and filth of the world. I'm not going to be taken in by those things. I'm not going to live discouraged, and defeated, and confused, and restless, and hopeless, and joyless life. And if you know that He's God, there's no reason to live that way. Brother Dan, don't you know what's going on? Yeah, I do. It's all right on course. And He's God. We need to determine that we're not going to lose the battle because He's God. We're not going to lose the battle to the destroying forces that have aligned themselves against our families and our homes. We're not going to lose the battle against the destroying forces that are trying to bring down our testimony. But I'm going to know that He's God. And we are to live in the reality of that truth. Not going to lose the battle against the forces that are trying to keep me from worshiping and praying. But rather we're going to live in the reality of knowing He's God. Not going to lose the battle by falling prey to despair or self-pity or self-sulking. We need to just live in the reality that He's God. Not going to lose the battle of falling prey to envy or anger or bitterness. But all that we would desire to just live in the reality He's God. And He will be exalted. And live the victory. So, oh, that God would interrupt our lives and say, be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted. Oh, that would grip our heart, that would have an impact, a lasting impact upon our lives. Listen for God. Listen for God's voice. But oh, that His voice would just burst upon the scene. I'm God. That's all you need to know. That's all you need to know. I'm God. I'm God. What else do you need? I'm God. Just calm down. Be still. You know, people that are always losing their minds, got to do something right now. If you don't fall into that same trap, you don't care. No, hopefully God just gives us enough sense to know He's God. I don't need to act like I've lost my mind. He's God. Live that reality. Oh, that God would interrupt our lives with those words. Again, we'll all stand. Song leader will come.